Hello and welcome. I'm Vinicius Apolinario from the Cloud Advocacy team at Microsoft. And today, I'm going to cover Microsoft Copilot in Azure for inline YAML specification editing. So what does that mean? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at my AKS cluster here. And as part of my deployment, I have the view of workloads. And then I have directly from the Azure portal the option to add a new workload based on a YAML specification. Now, of course, if you are using AKS, this is something that you are going to use for something simple. You most likely understand the YAML specification, but working with that YAML specification is not trivial. You have to remember all the parameters, the values that you need to add, and everything. So that's where Microsoft Copilot in Azure comes in to help. It basically is an assistant to help you write that YAML specification. If you are familiar with the GitHub Copilot experience, that's a very similar experience. So let me show you what I mean. Here you have the YAML specification that I can start to write. And then I have also the option for JSON. So just pointing out that Copilot and Azure work for both. So I'm going to switch to YAML. And essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call Copilot and start talking to it so it can help me do whatever action I want to do. So let's start by saying create the deployment of a generic app. So let's do something simple here. All right, so it came up with a very generic implementation or YAML specification for a generic application. You can see that even the image is not a real image here, but that doesn't really matter for the point of showing you Copilot in Azure. So I'm going to accept this change. I can even see it side by side if I wanted to, the previous configuration and then what exactly Copilot in Azure is doing for me. If I want to clearly see what are the small differences that maybe Copilot did in my code. So I'm going to switch back and I'm going to accept these changes. And now I can start working with it. I can change the image to use a real image, and I can do whatever other changes. Now, the other thing that Copilot will do for me is it will autocomplete and suggest other things that I might be adding to this specification. With that said, let's bring up Copilot again and ask for a few other things. Like for example, in fact, let me go back and switch to something else. Let's say in an environment that you wanted to deploy, you picked up a YAML specification from the web, and for whatever reason that website didn't have the right formatting for the YAML specification. Now, you most likely know that working with the YAML specification, it's kind of a pain to actually make sure that all the formatting for that YAML specification is correctly in place, so Kubernetes can actually go and read that specification. So you can see here that clearly I don't have that formatting correctly in place. And even the portal is already telling me that this is a invalid YAML format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up Copilot again and type /, and you can see that it brings a bunch of options here. Now, the one I'm going to use is the format option. And you can see that it essentially formatted the YAML specification. It didn't change anything. It just formatted the specification in a way that now can be properly deployed to a Kubernetes environment. Next, what I'm going to do is I am going to add to the specification. So let's say I brought this specification from someplace else. And essentially what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add more things to that specification to ensure that my application is deployed correctly. So in this case, I have the deployment of the application, I have the image that is going to be used, but I don't have the service that is going to expose the networking interface from the container image or from the container running in the node to the web. So let's do that. So I'm going to bring up Copilot here again and say, add the service on port 80. Let's see what it does. There you go. And now, please note the following. I'm going to accept this change, but the thing I want you to notice is that not only it brought the service here, but also it brought the port inside the deployments too. So I asked, can you please add the service for the port 80, so this service is exposed to the web, but that's only one piece of the deployment, right? You also need to expose the port from the container inside of the deployment itself to that service running on top of your deployments and the multiple replicas that you might have running on that Kubernetes cluster. Right. So that's pretty cool to see that it understands not only that you have to deploy whatever you asked Copilot in Azure to deploy, but also it fixed something else that you've also forgot as part of the deployment, right? So I'm going to do something here. I'm going to actually go and remove that it just added. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you to fix that deployment. So I'm going to bring Copilot again. I'm going to type /. I'm going to select the option to fix, and it's going to look for inconsistencies here and see if there's something missing. Maybe it's a selector, maybe it's exactly the port that was missing, and you can see that it found, I just deleted it, but it found the missing piece for your deployment to actually be completed successfully. So even before implementing this, I don't need to implement, see that it failed, and then troubleshoot on why it failed before I proceed. I can actually try to find issues before I even deploy this application. So I'm going to accept this one. And now what we're going to do is imagine that this application has some kind of requirements in terms of placing inside of my Kubernetes cluster, right? So let's think about a Windows application, for example. You might have Linux and Windows nodes running on this AKS cluster. So one of the things you want to ensure is that if you have a Windows application, it's always going to deploy to the Windows node. So I'm going to bring up Copilot again and say, add a, or let me it be even more generic. Instead of saying add a node selector, because I know a node selector is what is needed, I'm going to just say ensure this app is only deployed to Windows nodes. So let's say even if I don't know exactly what needs to be done in order for a Windows application to be deployed on Windows nodes. And there you go. It added a node selector saying that this is only for operating systems running Windows, right? Now, because I added in a generic form, one of the things that might happen is I might not know exactly what this node selector does. So one of the things I can do here is I can highlight this particular section, bring up Copilot, and say, please explain what exactly this particular section does. And there you go. You have an answer in a text form just explaining what this particular section does. In the case of node selector, it's just saying, look, if this is a node selector, it's going to select which nodes this application can run and is establishing a classification for Windows operating systems, right? So pretty cool. I can clearly see what's going on. And in fact, one of the things I could do as well, if I wanted to talk a little bit more and get more information about whatever is going on in my YAML specification, I can bring up Copilot /chat. And there you go. So you have a side panel here where you can have a chat with Copilot. You can talk about what is going on with your YAML specification. You can ask questions about the YAML specification, and then you can use it for just chatting with Copilot pretty much. So that's it for today. I hope you liked the video, and thank you for watching.